And welcome to another Hand Drink Solo wine video where we debunk wine myths, unpack wine science, and share wine history. Any one of which of those may or may not make you sound much more interesting at dinner parties. Today's Hand Drink Solo wine of the day is the Michelangelo Double Gold Le Brie Double Door Petit Verdot, which is an estate wine made with fruit from Le Brie estate on the floor of the Franschhoek Valley, and it is made by winemaker Irene de Fleury. But before we talk about Petit Verdot's global travels and the history of the grape, we're going to get into the glass and see what it tastes like. When we give this guy a sniff, well, we get an absolutely explosive nose. You don't have to spend long on there to know that there's red rose petals, red cherry, red plum, and even some of those cherry notes morph a little bit. You get a kind of like a cherry yogurt note, almost maybe cherry yogetta, a cherry lollipop. It really is very interesting. And those dairy notes sometimes on aromas are present when you have a lot of malolactic conversion that's taken place in the wine. But forget all the red fruit, there's deeper stuff as well. There's kind of blackberry fruit in there, and then spice, a kind of cedarwood note to it. And that makes sense because the wine has spent 24 months in French oak. Now, when we give it a sip, well, the palate is super vibrant. One begins to see why Petit Verdot has this reputation in Bordeaux for its really high acidity. And then the palate, for its part, is quite interesting because it manages to have this tannic structure presenting as kind of brawnier than the thighs of a Russian miner, but at the same time, your mouth is packed full of this really quite juicy berry fruit, both red fruit and black fruit. Up front, you start with a kind of sour cherry, maybe even a hint of raspberry, but then it gets sweeter and deeper and goes into that blackberry zone, very juicy blackberry. And then straight out of the Syrah playbook, on the finish, there's this puff of super clean white pepper. It's a fascinating wine. I'm not sure if this is textbook Petit Verdot, but it certainly is delicious. As we've said, there may not be a single textbook answer to what Petit Verdot should taste like, but there definitely is a commonly accepted textbook version of its biography or life story, if you wish. And that story goes a little something like this. In his youth, this inky, brutish loner of a cultivar earns the unkind nickname Petit Verdot from his peers because he was so jolly hard to ripen. And so he was rejected not only by his fellow grapes, but also by the farmers, and not officially exiled, but really ostracized on account of the fact that he was hard to work with, even though he'd lived in Bordeaux, his apparent indigenous home, for centuries longer than the cool kid Cabernet Sauvignon. And so it was that Petit Verdot traveled the world alone and sad until he was discovered in warmer climes by perhaps more open-minded winemakers and vignerons in countries like Chile and Australia and California and South Africa, where he was transformed, given a makeover, if you wish, and presented as a charismatic, muscular, single cultivar rockstar wine. Now, this is a lovely story and it has a happy ending, but the problem with it all is that some of that intel is out of date and the rest of it is just plain false. So what is the truth about Petit Verdot? Well, for starters, it would seem, thanks to DNA fingerprinting, that Petit Verdot is almost certainly not indigenous to Bordeaux. In fact, it comes from a little further south and west, down in the corner of France, just north of Spain, from a little region called Atlantique-Pyrénées. It's believed that Petit Verdot may have been domesticated from wild vines. And the reason that ampelographers think that is because one of the synonyms for Petit Verdot is lambrusque. Now, lambrusque is very similar to the word lambrusque, and lambrusque is really a kind of collective group name for a whole bunch of vitis vines that grow wild and in fact can be found on the edges of forests and fields. So it stands to reason that lambrusque could have originally come from this group of lambrusque wild vitis vines. The second reason that Petit Verdot's life story needs a little bit of work is because it makes it sound like its happy ending in the sunshine in the New World is the end of the story. But that just ain't so. Because what's unfolding now, or has been unfolding for the last 20 years, is that there's been quite a marked resurgence in Bordeaux, it's not indigenous home, where farmers are all of a sudden starting to plant more of it and have been since at least the mid-2000s. And this is because in Bordeaux, they've had a whole spate of really hot vintages. And so with all this extra warmth, Petit Verdot is all of a sudden not so difficult to ripen. And if you speak to really progressive and open-minded viticulturists and vignerons like Romain Trast, you will hear that the French wine industry has also been doing a lot of work improving the clonal material of Petit Verdot, making clones like Petit Verdot Clone 400, which has dramatically improved the way in which the cultivar ripens. And that's why it's now not at all uncommon to find cultivar bottlings of Petit Verdot in Bordeaux, not least of all Romain's own bottling, Le Temple de Torteyron's Celeste bottling, which, while it was once a Bordeaux blend, is now often 100% pure Petit Verdot. Some other straight Petit Verdots from Bordeaux to consider are wines like the Château Bellevue Petit Verdot, Les Vignerons de Tutillac Lieu-dit Petit Verdot, and Château de Léotin Petit Verdot. So give those a go and perhaps revisit what you thought you knew about Petit Verdot. Now that's all we have time for today, but what I have done is left links to 2 videos, both of which talk about the southern end of Franche-Comté, which is nowhere near Le Brie, but is a fascinating little region of elevated vineyards where some of Franche-Comté's most amazing wines are made. So check those out, and we'll see you again next time.